Elizabeth Margaret tensed when the stagecoach hit another rut, rattling her bones and fraying what remained of her already tattered nerves. After 6 days of travel from St. Louis to the Colorado Territory, the letter from her soon-to-be husband, folded in her pocket, had become soft with handling, its promises worn into the creases. But Nathan Fuller had written so little, just the barest of necessities directions to his ranch outside the town of Linden, Colorado, the money for her passage, and a promise of marriage. Not a word about himself, not really. Just that he needed a wife, and she had answered. The year was 1876, and at 25, Elizabeth had made the desperate choice that many women in her position were making. With her parents dead from influenza and her younger brother lost in the war, Philadelphia held nothing but memories and mounting debts. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like Providence. "Last stop before Linden," the driver called from above. Elizabeth straightened her travel-worn blue dress, smoothing wrinkles that would not surrender after days in the cramped coach. Across from her, an older woman with kind eyes gave her an understanding smile. "Mail-order bride?" she asked gently. Elizabeth nodded, her throat too dry to speak. "You'll be fine, dear. My niece did the same 3 years back. She's happy now, with 2 little ones." The woman patted Elizabeth's gloved hand. "What's his name? Your intended?" "Nathan Fuller," Elizabeth managed. "He has a cattle ranch." "Fuller?" The woman's eyebrows rose. "I know of him. Good man, they say. Hard worker." She hesitated. "Quiet sort, though. Keeps to himself, mostly." Elizabeth's stomach tightened. Quiet. She had hoped for someone talkative, someone who might fill the silence she'd been drowning in since losing her family. As the stagecoach rolled into Linden the following day, Elizabeth felt sick with apprehension. The small frontier town was nothing like Philadelphia, just a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising in the distance, and the constant swirl of dust kicked up by horses and wagon wheels. The coach stopped in front of the town's only hotel. Elizabeth stepped down, legs wobbly from the journey, and looked around anxiously. The driver handed down her single trunk, all she had left of her former life. "Miss Margaret?" She turned to find a tall man standing a few feet away. His broad shoulders filled out a clean but worn shirt, and his face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, darkened with several days' worth of beard, and eyes the color of a summer sky. "Mr. Fuller?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the street noise. He nodded once, stepping forward to take her trunk with ease. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, handsome in a rough-hewn way. "The wagon's there," he said, nodding toward a simple buckboard tied at the hitching post. His voice was deep but soft, as if unused to speaking. Elizabeth followed him, conscious of the curious glances from townsfolk. This was it, then. This taciturn man was to be her husband. She'd known marriage to a stranger would be difficult, but now, faced with his silence, panic fluttered in her chest. Nathan secured her trunk in the wagon and helped her up onto the seat, his touch brief and impersonal. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking to the horses. They pulled away from town without another word exchanged. The silence stretched between them for miles, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. Elizabeth stole glances at him, searching for something to say, but every question that formed on her lips seemed too forward or too trivial. "Your journey," he finally said, startling her. "Was it difficult?" "Long," she answered, grateful for the opening, "but not unbearable. I've never been west of the Mississippi before." He nodded, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "It's different here." "Yes, I can see that." She looked out at the vast landscape, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the space so enormous it made her feel insignificant. "Your ranch? Is it far?" "Another hour," he replied. And then silence again. Elizabeth twisted her hands in her lap. This was what she had feared most, not the hard work of a rancher's wife, not the isolation, but this wall of silence. How could she build a life with a man who barely spoke? As the wagon crested a rise, a small ranch came into view in the valley below. A modest house with a covered porch, a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals filled with cattle. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a vegetable garden stretched alongside the house. Home, Nathan said simply. It was beautiful in its way, a testament to hard work and determination. But as the wagon rolled into the yard, Elizabeth's courage faltered. What if she couldn't do this? What if his silence drove her to madness? Nathan helped her down from the wagon. "You'll want to rest," he said. "I'll show you the house." The interior was clean but sparse. A main room with a stone fireplace and simple furnishings, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove, and 2 bedrooms off to the side. Nathan carried her trunk into the smaller bedroom. "This is yours," he said, "until after the wedding." Elizabeth nodded, grateful for the propriety, though it hadn't occurred to her that he might expect anything else. "I'll be outside," he continued. "Take your time." Left alone, Elizabeth sank onto the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Silent tears at first, then deep, racking sobs that she muffled with her hands. What had she done? Traveled halfway across the country to marry a man who could barely string together a sentence? A man whose very silence seemed to amplify the loneliness she'd been trying to escape? When she emerged later, face washed and composure regained, she found Nathan on the porch, whittling a piece of wood. He stood when he saw her. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "Yes," she admitted. He nodded and led her back inside, where she discovered he'd prepared a simple meal, beans, cornbread, and coffee. They ate in silence until Elizabeth could bear it no longer. "Mr. Fuller," she began, setting down her fork, "I think we should discuss the arrangements, the wedding, and our expectations." He looked up, those startling blue eyes meeting hers directly for the first time. "The preacher comes through once a month. He'll be here in 3 days. So soon? We can wait if you prefer." His voice was careful, measured. "No, that's fine." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "I just want to be clear about what you expect of me as your wife." Nathan set down his coffee cup. "I need help with the ranch, cooking, gardening, the accounts. I'm not good with numbers." He paused. "And companionship, I suppose." Companionship. The word hung between them, laden with implications neither seemed ready to address. "I can cook and garden," Elizabeth said, "and I'm quite good with accounts. My father taught me." Nathan nodded. "Good. And you?" she pressed. "What will you provide?" He seemed surprised by the question. "This home, protection. I'll work hard to make sure you never want for anything." He hesitated. "I'm not a rich man, but the ranch is doing well." It was practical, sensible, exactly what their arrangement was supposed to be. Yet Elizabeth felt a hollowness in her chest. Was this all marriage would be? A business arrangement with a silent partner? The following days established a pattern. Elizabeth familiarized herself with the house and began taking over the domestic duties. Nathan worked from dawn till dusk with the cattle and the land. They shared meals in near silence, exchanged necessary information, and retired to their separate rooms. On the second night, Elizabeth was awakened by raised voices outside. She went to the window and saw Nathan confronting 3 men on horseback, their faces shadowed under their hats. Even in the dim moonlight, she could see the tension in Nathan's posture. "You're not welcome here, Blackwood." Nathan's voice carried clearly through the night air, stronger and harder than she'd ever heard it. The man in the center laughed. "That's not very neighborly, Fuller. Just thought we'd come meet your mail-order bride. Word travels fast." "Leave," Nathan said, and Elizabeth saw his hand hover near the gun at his hip. The man called Blackwood leaned forward in his saddle. "You think a woman like that is going to stay with a man who can barely string 2 words together? She'll be looking for better company before the month is out." Elizabeth's breath caught. The cruelty of the taunt made her hands clench against the windowsill. "She's not your concern," Nathan replied, his voice deadly quiet. "Now get off my land." The men eventually turned their horses and rode away, but not before Blackwood called back. "Give her my regards, Fuller. Tell her William Blackwood is always happy to show a lady a good time." Elizabeth retreated from the window before Nathan could see her watching. She slipped back into bed, her mind racing. Who was this Blackwood, and what quarrel did he have with Nathan? And more pressing, what had he meant about Nathan barely stringing 2 words together? The next morning, Elizabeth found the courage to ask, "Who were those men last night?" Nathan looked up sharply from his coffee. "You heard?" "Yes. The one called Blackwood. Nathan's expression darkened. William Blackwood owns the big ranch east of here, wants this land, has for years. He paused. Stay clear of him, he's dangerous. He seemed to know you well. Nathan's jaw tightened. We grew up together, used to be friends until... He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. It doesn't matter now. But it did matter, Elizabeth thought. Every scrap of information about this man she was to marry mattered desperately. He said something about you, about not speaking much. Nathan stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I have work to do. Please, Elizabeth said, surprising herself with her boldness. I'm to be your wife in 2 days. I deserve to know. Nathan stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid. For a long moment she thought he would walk out without answering. Then he spoke so quietly she had to strain to hear. After my parents died, I stopped talking much. People thought I was slow-witted, Blackwood included. A pause. Words don't come easy to me, never have. The simple admission cost him. She could see that in the set of his shoulders, the tension in his hands. It wasn't what she had expected, not a philosophical choice to be silent, not a reflection of a cold personality, but something deeper, more painful. I'm sorry, she said softly. He nodded once, then walked out the door. The preacher arrived the following afternoon, a jovial man with a booming voice that seemed to fill the small house. He performed the ceremony in Nathan's front room, with only Nathan's nearest neighbor and his wife as witnesses. Elizabeth wore her best dress, a dove-gray silk that had seen better days, and Nathan had put on a clean shirt and jacket. He spoke his vows clearly, his eyes never leaving hers, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, he placed a gentle kiss on her lips that ended too quickly for her to respond. That night, Elizabeth waited nervously in the bedroom that was now theirs, wearing a white nightgown and sitting rigid on the edge of the bed. When Nathan entered, he seemed as uncertain as she felt. We don't have to, he began, standing awkwardly by the door. If you need more time. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Elizabeth's chest. Perhaps, just for tonight. He nodded and moved to the chest at the foot of the bed, retrieving a blanket. I'll take the floor. No, Elizabeth protested. The bed is large enough. They lay side by side, a careful distance between them, both staring at the ceiling. Elizabeth could feel the heat of his body, hear his measured breathing. It was the closest they had been, and yet the distance remained. Good night, Mrs. Fuller, he said quietly. Good night, Nathan, she replied, using his given name for the first time. In the days that followed, they settled into a routine. Elizabeth took charge of the house, the garden, and the accounts, discovering a sense of purpose in the work. Nathan continued his labor on the ranch, but she began to notice small changes he made a point to clean up before dinner. He brought her wildflowers once, and he attempted in his halting way to tell her about his day. A week after the wedding, Elizabeth was in the garden when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, her heart sank to see William Blackwood and his men riding toward the house. Nathan was out checking the north pasture and wouldn't be back for hours. Elizabeth stood, brushing dirt from her apron, and moved to the porch, determined not to show fear. Mrs. Fuller, I presume? Blackwood called as he dismounted. He was handsome in a sharp way, with dark hair and eyes that didn't reflect his smile. A pleasure to finally meet you properly. Mr. Blackwood, she acknowledged coolly. My husband isn't here. What a shame. He stepped closer, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. I was hoping to discuss a business proposition with him. Perhaps you could relay it? Elizabeth folded her arms. I'm afraid any business will have to wait for his return. Blackwood's smile thinned. Of course, though I wonder if you know what you've gotten yourself into, marrying a man like Fuller. I know exactly what kind of man my husband is. Blackwood laughed. Do you? Did he tell you about what happened to his first wife? The question hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. First wife? Nathan had never mentioned being married before. She struggled to keep her expression neutral. I see he didn't, Blackwood continued, satisfaction evident in his tone. Ask him about Sarah. Ask him why a woman who supposedly loved him would run off in the dead of night, never to be heard from again. I think you should leave, Elizabeth said, her voice steadier than she felt. Just being neighborly, Mrs. Fuller. Thought you deserved to know the truth about the man you've tied yourself to. Blackwood put his hat back on. My offer to Nathan stands. This land would be better off as part of my operation. And my door is always open should you find yourself needing alternative arrangements. The insinuation made her skin crawl. Elizabeth watched them ride away, then went inside and sank into a chair, her thoughts in turmoil. A first wife? A woman who had abandoned Nathan? It would explain so much: his reticence, his caution, the pain she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. When Nathan returned at dusk, Elizabeth was waiting. He took one look at her face and stopped in the doorway. "What's wrong?" "Blackwood was here," she said. Nathan's expression hardened. "Did he threaten you?" "No, but he told me something." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "He said you had a wife before, Sarah. Is that true?" The color drained from Nathan's face. He moved to the table and gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white. For a long moment, he said nothing. "Yes," he finally answered. "Sarah was my wife." "What happened to her?" Nathan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the pain she saw there made her heart ache. "She died," he said. 5 years ago. Childbirth, both her and the baby. But Blackwood said she ran away." He lied. Nathan's voice was harsh. "Sarah never would have left. She loved this place. Loved—" He stopped, unable to continue. "I'm sorry," Elizabeth whispered. "I didn't know. I should have told you." Nathan ran a hand through his hair. "It wasn't fair to keep it from you. I don't talk about her. To anyone." "Did you love her very much?" The question slipped out before Elizabeth could stop it. Nathan nodded, his gaze somewhere far away. "She understood me. Didn't mind the silence." The words stung more than they should have. Of course he had loved his first wife. Of course she had been someone special who could accept him as he was. Elizabeth was just a practical solution to his solitude, a helpmate for the ranch, nothing more. "I'll have dinner ready soon," she said, turning away to hide the tears that threatened. Nathan caught her wrist. "Elizabeth," he said, her name sounding different in his voice. "I'm trying, with you. I know it's not enough, but I'm trying." The raw honesty in his eyes held her in place. "I know," she said softly. "I know you are." That night, they lay in bed as they had every night since the wedding, side by side, but not touching. But this time, Elizabeth felt the weight of unspoken words pressing down on her chest. "Tell me about her," she said into the darkness. "About Sarah." Nathan was silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a low voice, he began to speak. About how they'd met when his parents were still alive. How she'd been the daughter of a neighboring rancher. How they'd married young and built this place together. How she'd filled his silences with her laughter. As he spoke, Elizabeth felt tears slide down her temples into her hair, but she didn't wipe them away. This was the most Nathan had ever said at once, each word carrying the weight of years of held-back grief. "After she died," he concluded, "it got harder to talk, like the words got stuck." His voice was barely audible now. People in town started saying I'd gone simple from grief, or that maybe I'd had something to do with her death. Blackwood spread those rumors, said no woman would just die like that I must have done something. "That's cruel," Elizabeth whispered, anger rising on his behalf. "It's why I needed someone from away," Nathan continued, "someone who didn't know the stories, who might give me a chance." Elizabeth turned on her side to face him, though she could barely make out his profile in the darkness. "I'm giving you a chance, Nathan, but I need you to try to talk to me, even when it's hard. I can't live in silence." Nathan shifted to face her. "I will," he promised. "I'll try." In the days that followed, he did try. He spoke more at meals, telling her about the ranch, asking about her life before. The words didn't come easily. He would often pause, searching for the right expression, sometimes abandoning a thought halfway through. But the effort meant everything to Elizabeth. She, in turn, began to understand his silences. They weren't empty spaces, but a different form of communication, the careful way he laid a hand on her shoulder when passing, how his eyes followed her movements, the small improvements he made around the house for her comfort. Where once she had dreaded the quiet, She now found a certain peace in it. 3 weeks after their wedding, Elizabeth rode into town for supplies. At the general store, she overheard two women talking. "Poor thing," one said in a stage whisper. "Married to that Fuller man. They say he hardly speaks a word from one day to the next." "And after what happened to his first wife," the other replied. "Mark my words, this one won't last the winter either." Elizabeth stepped around the aisle, fixing the women with a cool gaze. "Ladies," she said pleasantly, "I couldn't help overhearing your concern for my well-being." Their faces flushed with embarrassment. "Mrs. Fuller, we didn't see you there." "Clearly," Elizabeth said. "I'd appreciate if you'd refrain from spreading rumors about my husband. Nathan Fuller is a good man, and I consider myself fortunate to be his wife." She completed her purchases with dignity and left, but the encounter left her shaken. Was this what Nathan faced every time he came to town? The whispers, the judgment, the suspicion? She was so preoccupied she didn't notice the riders until they surrounded her wagon a mile outside town. William Blackwood and two of his men blocked the road. "Mrs. Fuller," Blackwood called. "Fancy meeting you here?" "Excuse me," Elizabeth said, keeping her voice steady. "I need to get home." "Not just yet," Blackwood said, moving his horse alongside the wagon. "I've been thinking about you, all alone out there with a man who can barely tell you what he's thinking." He leaned closer. "Has he told you yet how his precious Sarah really died?" "I know exactly how she died," Elizabeth replied, "and I know you've been spreading lies." Blackwood's smile vanished. "Fuller's got you fooled, just like he fooled her. But I was there that night. I heard the screaming. By the time the doctor arrived, she was gone, and Fuller had some story about childbirth complications." "Get out of my way," Elizabeth demanded, her hands tight on the reins. "I made Sarah an offer once," Blackwood continued, ignoring her. "Told her she deserved better than a half-mute rancher with nothing to offer but hard work and silence. She chose wrong. Don't make the same mistake." "My husband is twice the man you are," Elizabeth said, her temper flaring. "Now move, or I'll drive this wagon right through you." Blackwood's face darkened. "You've got spirit. I like that." He reached for her arm. "Maybe you need a demonstration of what a real man—" The sharp crack of a rifle shot cut through the air. Blackwood's horse reared, nearly unseating him. Nathan appeared on the ridge above the road, rifle raised. "Next one won't miss," he called, his voice carrying clear and strong. Blackwood and his men backed away. "This isn't over, Fuller," he shouted. "Not by a long shot." Nathan rode down to the wagon, his eyes never leaving the retreating men until they were out of sight. Then he turned to Elizabeth, his face tight with concern. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No, I'm fine." Elizabeth's hands were shaking. "How did you know?" "Mrs. Tanner from the store rode out to warn me. Said you'd had words with some gossips and she was worried Blackwood might cause trouble." Nathan took the reins from her trembling fingers. "Let's get you home." That night, after dinner, Nathan paced the floor of their cabin, agitation evident in every movement. "This has to end," he said. "Blackwood won't stop." "What does he want?" Elizabeth asked. "Is it really just the land?" Nathan stopped pacing. "It's more than that. Sarah was promised to him before she chose me. He never forgave either of us." He sat heavily in a chair. "After she died, he tried to buy the ranch, said I had no reason to stay. When I refused, the rumors started." "That's why you don't go to town much." Nathan nodded. "Easier to avoid the talk." Elizabeth moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his rough hand in hers. "We can't live like this. Always looking over our shoulders. There must be something we can do." "There is," Nathan said, his eyes meeting hers with a new determination. "We can stand our ground, together." The simple declaration and the inclusion of "together" made Elizabeth's heart swell. For the first time, she felt truly partnered with this quiet man who was her husband. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The next day, the sheriff from Linden rode out to their ranch, his expression grave. "Fuller," he said, nodding to Nathan. "Madam, got a situation in town. Blackwood's filing formal charges against you." "What charges?" Nathan asked, tension radiating from him. "Claims you threatened his life yesterday. Says he has witnesses." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Look, Fuller, I know there's bad blood between you two, but I have to follow the law. You need to come in and answer these charges." "This is ridiculous," Elizabeth protested. "Blackwood and his men surrounded my wagon. My husband was protecting me." "That may be, madam, but right now it's his word against yours. And in this town," the sheriff didn't need to finish. "In this town, Blackwood had influence." "I'll come," Nathan said quietly. "Nathan, no." Elizabeth grabbed his arm. "It's a trap!" "I have to, Elizabeth." His eyes held a steady resolve. Running would only make me look guilty. Of everything. The ride to town was tense. The sheriff, a decent man named Parker, tried to reassure them that a fair hearing was possible, but Elizabeth wasn't convinced. She'd seen how the townsfolk looked at Nathan, heard the whispers. Linden's small courthouse was packed when they arrived. Blackwood sat at the front, flanked by his men, his expression smug. The town judge, a thin man with spectacles, called the proceedings to order. Blackwood presented his case first, spinning a tale of unprovoked aggression. According to him, he'd merely stopped to greet Mrs. Fuller on the road when Nathan appeared and nearly shot him in cold blood. "And this isn't the first time Fuller has shown violent tendencies," Blackwood concluded, his voice carrying through the room. "Many of us have wondered about the mysterious circumstances of his first wife's death. Perhaps it's time those questions were answered as well." A murmur ran through the crowd. Elizabeth felt sick. This wasn't about yesterday at all. It was Blackwood's chance to publicly accuse Nathan of a murder that had never happened. When it was Nathan's turn to speak, he stood slowly. Elizabeth held her breath. Speaking in public was difficult enough for him. Doing so under these circumstances seemed almost cruel. "Mr. Fuller," the judge prompted when Nathan remained silent, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Nathan looked at the judge, then at Blackwood, and finally at Elizabeth. She tried to convey all her support, all her belief in him, with her gaze. "Yes," Nathan said, his voice low but steady. "I do." The room fell silent, everyone leaning forward to hear the man who rarely spoke. "William Blackwood accosted my wife yesterday," Nathan began. "It wasn't the first time he's threatened her, or me." His words came slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. 5 years ago, my first wife, Sarah, died in childbirth. It was a tragedy, not a crime. Dr. Phillips was there. He can confirm it. The elderly doctor, sitting near the back, nodded solemnly. "That's right," he called out. "I delivered the stillborn child myself. There was too much bleeding. Nothing could be done." Nathan continued. "Blackwood has been spreading lies about me since Sarah died. He wanted her for himself, and when she chose me, he couldn't accept it. Now he wants my land, and he'll say anything, do anything, to get it." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Nathan's clear, measured speech was not what they had expected from the silent rancher. "Yesterday, I fired a warning shot because Blackwood and his men had surrounded my wife's wagon. She was alone, and they were threatening her." Nathan's eyes hardened. "I would do it again to protect her. Any man here would do the same." Several men in the crowd nodded in agreement. Elizabeth stood. "I was there," she said firmly. "Mr. Blackwood stopped my wagon and made inappropriate advances. When I refused, he became aggressive. My husband saved me from what could have been a much worse situation." The judge looked between Nathan, Elizabeth, and Blackwood, whose confident expression had begun to falter. "This seems to be a case of one man's word against another's," the judge said slowly. "But I'm inclined to believe that Mr. Fuller was acting to protect his wife, which is his right." He fixed Blackwood with a stern gaze. "The charges are dismissed, and Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you keep your distance from the Fullers in the future." Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Fuller," he spat, storming out of the courthouse with his men following. The crowd dispersed, but not before several townspeople approached Nathan and Elizabeth. Mrs. Tanner from the store, the doctor, and a few others offered quiet words of support. It wasn't universal acceptance, but it was a start. As they rode home, Elizabeth felt a shift between them. Nathan had found his voice when it mattered most, not just for himself, but for her, for them. That night, as they prepared for bed, Nathan approached her with an uncertainty that reminded her of their wedding night. "I'm not good with words," he said softly, "but I need you to know something." Elizabeth waited, giving him the time he needed. "When Sarah died, I thought I'd never feel anything again. I took you as my wife because I needed help, and you needed a home. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. But it's become more than that. For me, Elizabeth's heart quickened. For me, too, she whispered. He drew her closer, one hand coming up to touch her cheek. I can't promise I'll ever be a man of many words, but I promise what I do say will always be the truth. That's all I ask, Elizabeth said, leaning into his touch. Nathan lowered his face to hers, hesitating just a breath away. You're safe with me now, he whispered against her lips. Always. The words, so simple and yet so profound, broke something open inside Elizabeth. All the fear she'd carried since leaving Philadelphia, all the uncertainty of her new life, all the doubt about her hasty marriage, it all washed away in the wake of those 5 words. You're safe with me now? She closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that held the promise of everything to come. In the years that followed, Nathan Fuller never became a loquacious man, but he found ways to communicate his deepest feelings through the gentle brush of his hand on Elizabeth's back as he passed, through the way he listened intently when she spoke, through the careful consideration he gave her opinions about the ranch. And sometimes, in the quiet of their bedroom, he would find the words to tell her exactly what she meant to him. William Blackwood eventually left Linden. His influence diminished after several other townspeople came forward with stories of his bullying and manipulation. The Fullers' ranch prospered, and 2 years after their wedding, Elizabeth gave birth to a son they named James, after Nathan's father. A daughter, Sarah, followed 2 years later. Named in honor of the woman whose memory no longer cast a shadow, but had become a respected part of their shared history. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathan presented Elizabeth with a small wooden box he had crafted himself. Inside lay a journal, its pages filled with his careful handwriting. What is this? Elizabeth asked, turning the pages in wonder. The things I couldn't say, Nathan explained, a flush rising on his weathered cheeks. I've been writing them down, for you. The journal contained everything: his thoughts when he first saw her step down from the stagecoach, his fears that he would disappoint her, the moment he realized he was falling in love with her, his hopes for their future. Years of thoughts, carefully preserved in ink when his voice had failed him. Elizabeth clutched the precious book to her chest, tears blurring her vision. This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. Nathan pulled her into his arms. You gave me my voice back, he said, his lips against her hair. You gave me a reason to find the words. In the soft evening light of the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, Elizabeth Margaret Fuller knew she had found exactly what she had been seeking when she boarded that stagecoach years ago, not just security or escape, but a love that transcended words, a silence filled with meaning, and a man whose quiet strength had become the foundation of her happiness. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, Nathan replied, the words coming easily now, as natural as breath between them. More than I can say. But he didn't need to say it. Elizabeth could read it in his touch, in his eyes, in the life they had created together. Some things, after all, spoke louder than words.